Hello, moms. How are you doing? Welcome to DAMES webinar series. It is February 2020, almost the end of February already. I cannot even believe it. And I'm really excited today. We have Staci Neustadt, who is here to do our webinar. As you all know, this webinar series is a part of one of the many things that we provide to our members on DAMES. We also do Meditation Monday, where we feature one of our guided meditations. They're always on the site ready for you, but we feature one each Monday just so that you kind of see something new or maybe see something you haven't seen on the site before. We also do Wellness Wednesday on Wednesday, either a yoga, a Pilates, or just a stretch breathing class. And then, of course, Fitness Friday on Fridays, so you can kind of get your workout on. I don't know about you, but I haven't been able to get to a gym in like a year because with two special needs children, it's just not a reality. So I love Fitness Friday. We're recording new stuff for 2020 right now. That will start to get added next month. So every week next month, you're going to start seeing some new things pop up onto the site. So if you've done all 40 of the Pilates classes or all 40 of the fitness classes, you'll be starting to get something new. But today for our webinar series, we have Staci Neustadt, who is here with us. Staci has been a speech language pathologist for 15 years. She works at Bayo Enterprises, and Staci and I actually met at a DDD event where we were part of, they call it Kaizen event, where we help to kind of reshape the planning process, the plans of care that DDD is going to start rolling out. So her and I got to meet there. We hit it off right away. We also started to plan the Care for the Giver conference together. Last year, it was so much fun. This year, we're actually, the feedback we got from the Care for the Giver conference was, we really just want to be pampered. And so we're like, okay, we can do that. So this year, we're going to plan like a one-day pamper fest. And then hopefully next year, we're going to start an overnight retreat, which I think would just be absolutely amazing. And Staci at the Care for the Giver conference gave this really great talk about building these foundational relationships with therapists that are in our lives, right? I mean, most of us have one or more therapists that come in and out of our house that we have to take our kids to. And it's really hard because it's another relationship that you have to manage. And they're so critical to the development of our children. And when Staci gave this talk at the Care for the Giver conference, I was just like, oh my God, she has to come on and talk to the DAMES members about what she said, because I just thought it was so profound. So Staci, I'm really happy that you're here today. Thank you for coming on and doing a webinar on this important issue.
Absolutely. I'm excited to be here, and hopefully there's some new information for parents and kind of have some aha moments on how they can build that relationship with their therapist.
Yeah, I think it's just such a wonderful topic, and I'm gonna let you take it away.
Perfect. All right. So, the biggest thing with building that relationship with your therapist is communication, trust, and going with your gut. So, like Michelle said, I've been a speech pathologist for 15 years. I've worked with people with disabilities for over 20 years, and I will fully admit and be vulnerable and say I've not done it the right way for all of these years, and I'm sure I still screw up here and there, because we are all first and foremost people. So we have our own moments. So always keep that in mind, as well as we have to keep that in mind about our families that we work with. So first of all, obviously, if you're here, your child gets therapy, which is huge, because that's that first vulnerable step of reaching out and getting services for your child. Now, being a parent is tough, whether you have a neurotypical child or have a neurodiverse child. Parenting is hard. So I love to read and quote Brene Brown. So I want you to keep this line in mind from one of her books. She said, the real questions for parents should be, are you engaged? Are you paying attention? If so, plan to make lots of mistakes and bad decisions. Imperfect parenting moments turn into gifts as our children watch us try to figure out what went wrong and how we can do better next time. The mandate is not to be perfect and raise happy children. Perfection doesn't exist. And I found what makes children happy doesn't always prepare them to be courageous, engaged adults. So I think this is important not only with our kids, but also working with our therapists. You know, we all, and speaking for myself and a lot of therapists I've interviewed and talked with in the years, we go into this field because we want to help. And we want to not only help the clients we work with, but the families that we work with. And so having that open communication and building that trust is important on both sides. So to kind of give a little background, I'm sure some of you may know the process of therapy, but some of you may not because it's never been explained. So basically the way therapy works is obviously first you reach out to the therapist and say something is wrong with my child. I don't feel like he's developing correctly, or something is off. So typically first an evaluation is done to determine, hey, is there something that is wrong? Now every once in a while scores come back and it's like, okay, it's not a speech and language thing, maybe it's an OT thing, or maybe it's a behavior thing, and that's the area you need to go look at. Then after an evaluation is done, the treatment and duration and frequency is determined, as well as the goals. So this is where usually, therapists are writing goals and making those recommendations. This is where a family absolutely has that right to say, okay, what do these goals mean? Why are you working on this? To ask for clarification, because that's so important that parents understand those parts. So over the years, therapy has really evolved. So kind of that old thinking of therapy is, you bring your child, they go in to see the therapist, they come out, the therapist says they did a good job, here's your homework, done. Then the therapists are the experts. And while we are the experts in development, parents are really the experts in their child. And so we definitely look to you for information. So kind of the new way of thinking for therapies is that parent involvement really is that key to success. So it takes a whole team, not only the parent, but also the school, the teachers, other therapists that are involved. And really to get that team approach, we all have to have that open communication. So it often isn't always known that parents can sit in on the therapy session. Now, with that said, sometimes parents see, oh, if I sit in, my child doesn't do as well. And so it is better maybe sometimes to watch through a window. Videotaping is always a great option as well. Sometimes if it's hard for the family to come in because they have other children, or again, the child doesn't do well with the parent in there, there is that option to videotape what we're doing so you can see the interventions that we're doing. So as a parent, don't ever feel like you can't ask questions. Don't ever feel like it's a dumb question, because it's never a dumb question. I always tell parents there is no bad question. Ask me questions. I love to hear questions, because then I know that you're thinking about the process, that you want more information. We do this day in and day out. So it's just kind of second nature to us to go in and just do the therapy. And sometimes we even forget to communicate, hey, I'm working on this so it'll develop your child's social communication, or hey, I'm working on this to work on your child's receptive communication. So if you're not sure what's going on in that therapy, be sure to always ask, because that's that beginning to that communication and opening that trust. So know that really the therapist is the skilled professional that knows the development, but the parents are the ones that know their child and know, oh, you know what, he hates red balloons, don't play with those. Or you need to talk quietly because he gets very oversensitive when somebody is loud when they talk to him. All that information is really important when working with the therapist. So really, kids learn best with their natural teachers. And who is that? That's obviously the parents. So that's so important that that information is shared with us, and that therapy is integrated with the play and daily activities. So when we're creating our goals, there's also home programs. So there's goals that families work on. And oftentimes when I do an evaluation, when I'm creating those home program goals, ask the families, hey, what does your daily routine look like? Where do you see being able to work on requests? Where do you see a good time being able to work on this vocabulary that we're trying to work on? And then we get feedback on how they can incorporate it. And if a home program is created that doesn't fit your family, please speak up. So for example, I had a recent evaluation where I was making a home program and the mom told me, oh, he hates videos, which was great information because then I wasn't going to recommend to watch videos because we use videos all the time in therapy to teach inferencing and problem solving, things like that. So all of that information is good to know. So now the other piece that is new in therapy is that shift to really person-centered approaches. And I'm going to talk a little bit about what that means because therapy really does range and therapists range. So this new shift to person-centered approaches means really looking at who is this person? What are their strengths? What do they enjoy? And then you create the goals around that. So that video is a perfect example. If you're trying to work on, say, inferencing skills with a child and they hate watching videos, you're going to figure out a different way to work on that. And so using what they're interested in as what they enjoy and what's important to the family. So for example, if the family says, I want my child to be able to go out and order at the restaurant, he's 13 and I don't want to have to order for him. Well, that's a great goal that we can absolutely work on. But you see how important that communication is, that families share that information with us so then we can create the goal around it. And then it's also very person-centered because that kiddo loves to go to a restaurant. So you can see how all that information is really important and combined. So we know that parents are the expert in the child. And again, we're obviously just the experts in development and knowing all that information. So combining all of that information really helps create the best therapy program. So let's think more about this new the new thinking and that open communication. So for any of you that have read his book, Stephen Covey says trust is the most essential ingredient to communication. So obviously you've got a new therapist come in, and what we always tell our therapists here at BAO is that first month is building that rapport. We specialize in working with kids with autism, and that building that trust, building that rapport is so important. And so that's how most therapists will come in and just build that relationship first. So it may just look like play. It may just look like conversation, but that is such an important beginning to therapy in order to build that trust, not only with the kiddos we're working with, but again, also with the families. And then this is a great time too to gain information from the parents and say, what is your kiddo like? What sets them off? What makes them upset? So really that first beginning month is all about building rapport, building trust. It's so important that parents share all kinds of information. I know it sounds crazy, but think about how much sleep, eating, food, changes in routine, all of that impacts how they perform in therapy. I really love to take that holistic approach, and I love resources. So when a family comes to me and, just says they have a speech problem, I want more information. Are they good sleepers? Oh no, they're horrible sleepers. They only sleep 2 hours at night. I'm going to give you some resources on how to get some help on that, because it's like a domino effect. If kids are poor sleepers, a lot of times then that looks like ADHD, or it looks like some other things, or anxiety, because sleep is so important, along with feeding. If I have a family that says, oh, my kiddo, chicken nuggets and french fries, that's it, nothing else. Well, then I might think, wow, their gut must really be yucky right now. And that maybe is why he screams every time I try to work with them. So you can see how all those pieces are really important. And so again, your therapist may give you some resources on kind of help to support you with that. So regardless of the setting, you know, that consistent communication between all parties is really important. Again, please share any other providers that your child works with, because we do love to reach out to the school therapists, to ABA, to behavior people, because it really does take that team approach. And again, as therapy is shifting into a new world, collaborative care and that integrated approach is really where we're headed. And it is so important because we see huge progress when we all work as a team. So one thing that's important to think about as parents is, what is your ultimate goal in receiving therapy? Because I can evaluate a kiddo and I can look at the scores and I can think of a gazillion things to work on a lot of times, when depending on the needs of the child. But I always ask parents, you know, what are you wanting? Which is so important, because again, I'm not going to create a goal for the kiddo to follow 3-step directions if you could care less about following directions. You just want him to communicate. So it's important that parents share that. So in kind of talking about goals, again, some background information. I want to make sure that parents know how goals should be written, because I'm sure you've seen goals from, and again, I'm speaking from the speech world, but I'm sure you've seen goals of so-and-so will increase his vocabulary to 80% accuracy. And then you've probably seen more specific goals like so-and-so will make requests to advocate for themselves in X amount of opportunities, using the words no, help, all done. So you've seen that wide variety of goals. This is how goals should be written. They should be SMART goals. So the S stands for specific. Is the goal specific to achieving a certain behavior? M stands for measurement. Is it measurable? Do you actually have a quantity or a number that you're going to achieve? Now, this gets tricky when it comes to social goals, and a lot of times that measurement may be a rubric. They'll score a 3 on this rubric. A means it's achievable. Now, this is a tricky one, because as a parent myself, we of course want our kids to reach that highest level of their potential. Now, this is where we each have to look at our individual child and look at where they're at cognitively, where they're at speech and language, motor, all of those pieces, and look at, okay, what's achievable right now, and being realistic with what is achievable. Again, obviously we all want amazing things for our children, but those amazing things are going to look very different depending on the kids. Maybe the ultimate achievable goal is for your child to just say, I love you, and to engage for more than 10 minutes. And that's awesome. And then say you achieve that goal and you're like, all right, we're raising the bar to the next level. But so making sure those goals are achievable are huge, and achievable within a decent time period. So within that year is usually when we try to make it achievable. And again, this kind of pairs into the R, which is realistic. Again, we all want our kids to reach certain levels, but we have to make sure that we're being realistic about where they're at. Now, what's so important when I say this is that each of the kids that we work with are individuals. It is so key that we look at their strengths. We have so many kids that are amazing artists. Maybe they're even not non-oral communicators. I'm not going to use that word nonverbal because it is overused and incorrectly used. Our kids are verbal in different ways, but maybe they're amazing artists. That's a huge strength, and they could possibly be, you know, make pictures for green cards or cartoons or things like that. So we want to make sure that when we're making the goals, they're realistic for that individual. And then timely. These goals have to be met within a certain time period. So SMART goals: specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, timely. That's what your goals should look like. It should not just be Johnny will increase his understanding of 1-step directions. It should be more specific than that. So communication also is not all about therapy, but in terms of communicating with your therapist, think about the other components with therapy. It's schedules. So it's making sure, and this goes both ways, that if your schedules change, that you're communicating with your therapist, and your therapist should be doing the same thing. Cancellations, makeups, all of this kind of impacts how we feel about other people. So if on both sides, if we're respectful about the other person's time, about the other person's effort, then that's going to continue to build that trust. So making sure to be aware of all of that. So, in kind of talking again about therapy, we typically see the kids one time a week, two times a week. Keep in mind that we are not miracle workers, and 1 hour of therapy is not going to fix or make great gains in your child. What's going to do that is your carryover at home. And that's why sometimes, when we make our recommendations in an evaluation, we look at a lot of pieces. We look at family. Does this mom have 7 kids and is already overwhelmed, and coming twice a week is just going to decrease her quality of life and cause more chaos? Then maybe we'll just recommend the one. Maybe if the family is like, yes, my kiddo is super young, he's at a great learning stage, okay, maybe we'll recommend the 2 hours. But whether it's 1 hour or 2 hours, there is no definitive research that says your child is going to make more or less gains because of that. But honestly, what is shown the greatest progress is when parents are following through with what we're trying to achieve in our goals. And it's because, again, it goes back to you are the natural provider. You have a gazillion opportunities in the day to make comments. Oh, look, there's an airplane. Oh, look, there's a rabbit, and things like that throughout the day. So we're going to teach you the purpose and the goal that we're trying to achieve, but you're going to be practicing it throughout the day, as well as habilitation. We love habilitation providers because they're the ones who can also carry this over for us. So you can also, it's important that parents understand what those goals mean. So again, with the SMART goals, if you have a goal and you're not sure what it is trying to achieve, ask. If your child has had the same goals for over a year, over 2 years, over 3 years, ask. Now, luckily, like Michelle said, we were part of this pilot program here in Arizona where we're going to be creating plans of care. And the idea is with this collaborative new change where the doctors are seeing more paperwork of what we're doing, but also this plan of care running a year, you'll see that data. You'll see the progress over the quarters, and you'll see, wow, my kiddo's been at 50% or 20% for this whole year. Ask your therapist. And really the process in our minds is, wow, they're at the same data. Either this intervention is not working, I'm going to try to change it up, and I'm going to document that I've changed it and I have tried everything in my toolbox. And then maybe either the kiddo isn't ready for that, or maybe that's where they're at with this goal at this stage, and we're going to maybe back it up to make it a little bit easier, or make it again more achievable. Where it's at right now, it isn't achievable. So, we as therapists can do what we can do in our 1 hour or 2 hours, but what you guys do at home, again, is just priceless. I can tell you from personal experience and stories I hear from other families, we know when families are carrying over because all of a sudden the kiddo comes every week and that skill has been established. Now, we also understand that each family is different. That mom with the 7 kids, who maybe 4 of them have autism, we're going to understand that your caseload of your life is you have a lot going on. And that's where maybe we'll recommend, hey, this HAB provider can help out with it. or, you know, this respite provider. So we're going to help you find the resources to help support as well, because we know that parents are doing the best that they can. But again, we still need the whole team to help support it. So also, like I said, with the communication is the trust, and know that progress takes time. So think about, as adults, neurotypical adults, we've got a bad habit that we have to break. Think about how long it takes for us to break that habit, because it's ingrained in us. It kind of goes the same with our kiddos that are developing and learning. It takes time, and it's hard sometimes to make that change. But the more that they are exposed to what we're working on, the more that the kiddos are reinforced accurately and appropriately with what we're shooting for. So for example, if you're trying to work on just communication and your kiddo's already leading you to the fridge, and your speech therapist said, okay, well, we're going to, up the ante. And next time he takes you to the fridge, grab his communication device or grab his communication book and have him ask for what he wants, then again, that's what's going to make that huge change. It's just that little piece of carrying over and getting into that habit of providing that opportunity. So along with trust too, is always go with your gut. You don't have to stay with a therapist when the rapport isn't built, when your gut just tells you this person's approach doesn't match my beliefs and doesn't match my family. So while there's a wide range of therapy interventions, there is a huge range of therapists. And you kind of think about, okay, what makes a good therapist? Some people believe it's passion, which I have to agree. A therapist who is passionate is going to stay up to date on the latest research, is going to, stay up in terms of what the latest intervention is, and is going to have a huge heart for making progress with your child. But then there's that building rapport, and I've had kiddos I've worked with where it's like, you know what, it just isn't clicking. And it's not that someone's right or wrong. Sometimes it's just, it doesn't work. I'm a loud talker, so sometimes I have to remind myself in therapies, oh, this kiddo likes it more calm and quiet, but maybe it's just not a good match. So parents absolutely have that right to say, you know what, I don't think it's a good match, and try to find another therapist. Well, I know that's scary too, because there's a lot of lack of therapists. However, you have to think, these are the tools that I know that I've learned from this therapist. I can still continue to work with my child at home. So that's where kind of therapy comes in lots of different shapes and sizes due to therapist experience, their personal preferences, and knowledge in terms of where their passions are. My passion is in AAC. I helped create an AAC system, and that's where if you send me a kiddo who is a non-oral communicator and needs a system set up, I'm your gal. But you send me a kiddo who needs feeding, and I will say, here is someone else that specializes in that area, because that's definitely not my forte. So, and kind of still talking about how to get more out of our therapy, I want you to think about your therapy sessions. Hopefully you're sitting in. Like I said, sometimes it doesn't work out. In those cases, hopefully you're getting a video of what the intervention looks like, or hopefully your therapist is demonstrating it so that you can carry it over at home. But I want you to think about those ends of your sessions. And when you ask, how did Johnny do today? And if your therapist says, great, ask for more information. And I want you to think about these 5 questions, because this will give you more information and insight to your therapist, your kiddo session. So you might ask, what were your goals for the session today? What did you guys work on? What appears to be most difficult for my child? What appears to be easy for my child? And then, do you have any concerns with how my child is progressing? And what can I do at home to facilitate progress? Those 5 questions will give you more information on what the therapist is doing, your therapist's knowledge around what they're doing, and then it gives you a good idea of how you can follow through with at home. Now, again, kind of building that trust and communication. If your therapist gives you an activity or gives you guidance on how to work with it at home, but it doesn't really fit your family, your beliefs, then you can say, okay, thank you for that, but do you have a different way? Because that doesn't really fit with our family. And I'm going to be honest and say, I am not going to do this. I love that when parents tell me that, you know what? That's too much. I'm not going to be able to do it, because we can brainstorm and come up with different ideas. But when a family says, okay, yeah, we'll do it, and then we don't do it, and then the family doesn't carry over, that starts to chip away again at that trust, because then there's just frustration and animosity of, okay, they told me they were going to do it and then they didn't do it. And then there's just frustration, because then we're not helping you guys, because you're frustrated with the suggestion we gave, and then you don't want to carry over, and then we're frustrated because the kiddo's not making progress. So it's so important that all of our vulnerability walls come down, and that we have that open communication of, you know what, can you give me a different idea, because that's not going to work for my kiddo. And brainstorming, I love it. I have great parents who come up with their own ideas. Oh, you know what, I think I could really work on their body parts in the bathtub, because he loves when I wash his arms and I say arm, and it's like, awesome, you just came up with your own home program. So sometimes you guys come up with great ideas as well. So with this new thinking and kind of new process of therapies, parents are the key. So the therapist helps get things started, but the caregivers are the ones that are really the car and the gas that keep the progress going, because we can help guide in terms of what's going to happen next and the next developmental stage, and guide families. But really the families are the ones who are doing it all day long, and providing those communication opportunities, providing those social opportunities to go practice hanging out with other kids. Obviously families are with their kids all day. So we appreciate families so much, and our hearts go out to families, and the struggles that they may go through. And like I said, we all oftentimes go into this field because we're helpers and our hearts are big. And so know that that's oftentimes where we're coming from. But that communication and building that trust is so key, so that your child gets the most out of therapy, and your child gets the most out of making progress when people are communicating, whether it's, hey, this school isn't working, or hey, you canceled 3 sessions, I really want to do those makeups. All of those components are so crucial when it comes to making progress. So I know there's some questions that Michelle got off of Facebook.
All right, coming back.
Cool.
Okay, thank you, Staci. That was really informative, and I love those 5 questions, because I feel like sometimes when we get done with therapists, like, we just don't know what to ask. Oftentimes we're kind of sitting in the room next door, and we're not even sure what the heck is going on in the room that our kid is at. So I loved your idea too about, asking them if you can record the session. Because I've been there to so many therapy appointments, and it is hard, because you don't know what they're doing. And so then you don't know how to continue it at home and use like the same prompts and the same language.
For sure.
So that was really cool. That's good information.
Good.
So one of the questions one of our members asks is, how do you politely talk to the therapist about not giving kind of parental advice, or kind of staying in their lane, I guess is another way of putting it. Because I know you spoke a little bit about, as a speech therapist, you might want more information. You might want to know how they're sleeping and how they're eating and how they're doing all of this other stuff. And I think sometimes as parents, we get really defensive, and we're like, why do they want to know that? Are they judging us? Because it is how it feels sometimes. So maybe talking a little bit how to ease into those conversations a little bit.
Oh, for sure, for sure. And like I said, we really look at the whole kid, because when, especially like if say progress is slow, we're looking at, well, parents are doing everything, we're doing everything, what is that, what else is going on? And I mean, we've found kids that, oh wow, they had a rotten tooth, and that's why they've been acting out for the last week. And so that's why a lot of times, especially if progress isn't evolving as you would expect, sometimes those questions will come up. And so know that that's why we're asking some of those questions. It's because it really is the holistic thing. Now, when you have, again, our hearts are big and we mean well, but I totally understand how sometimes we go out of that lane. And if that does occur, I would just say, well, thank you for your input and thank you for your advice, but that doesn't work with my family, or that doesn't work with our beliefs. Um, and that conversation does go both ways. We get family members who are like asking us counseling questions, and beyond our scope. And so in the same breath, we oftentimes have to say, you know what, that's out of my scope. So it really, that all that information goes both ways, but you can absolutely just gently say, thanks for the advice, but that doesn't really work for my family. And that's okay.
Yeah.
It's important for us to be respectful of different cultures, different beliefs, different discipline styles. We also sometimes need to be put in check as well.
Yeah, and is it a good idea to first like approach the therapist and see if they alter their behavior before you're going to their boss or their higher up, or like how would you work that system?
I would recommend trying with a therapist first,
Mhm.
because maybe she's just having a bad day and really wasn't thinking about what she was doing. Now, if it continues to happen, then obviously it's not just a one time flukes. And I would go up to whoever the supervisor is, because then it's turned into a training piece. I love, good, bad, or otherwise, when I get phone calls from families that are saying, wow, I heard from families who say, you know what, this is my kiddo, is not pairing with the new therapist. I need to know that information too. So if stuff isn't changing, I would definitely reach out to supervisors.
Yeah, and we've had lots of therapists in and out of our home, and we have a lot of frank conversations with the higher ups about, this one's just not working out. We have to cycle her out, and really you can't be nervous as a parent to say those things.
100%. I mean, yeah, I can't emphasize that enough. And I know a lot of parents are like, well, something's better than nothing, but not if your child's miserable,
Yeah.
and not if you're miserable. And, that goes to even just coming to therapy too. We service 3 on up, and we have members that are in their 20s that every time they come, they're miserable. And sometimes we tell the family, you know what? They've been coming for 20 years. Do you think that they don't want to come anymore? And they, talking about, getting to that point, do you think they're at that point where they're good to go? They're happy with who they are.
Yeah.
And sometimes, that's what it is too. It's like, okay, they're not happy, we're not happy. It may be just time to just stop. And that's okay. You don't have to feel any guilt over it. And I know that's easier said than done, but it is okay. It's not the end of the world.
Yeah, I think that's such a important point, that at some point maybe you are just kind of done with therapy and your child is just kind of over it. I mean,
Yeah.
you think about how much work these kids are doing, and they're kids.
Yeah.
And I think that sometimes we as parents forget that. Like, they need to go out and play, they need to go and do sports, and they need to, be in their community, not just in a therapy office all the time, especially if they're miserable when they're there.
For sure.
So, I love hearing that from a therapist, that it's okay, if your child is done, that they're done. Like, that's fine. That's an okay thing. And I think you saying that is very powerful. I think that that's a really good thing to say to parents.
For sure. Yeah.
Another thing that somebody asked was, how can people afford therapy? So therapy can be very expensive. There is insurance, there is DDD. What other mechanisms are there to help parents pay for therapies?
So, again, speaking kind of from speech therapy, there are sometimes where companies have nonprofits, like we have Bayo Institute. And so when we have a family who doesn't have insurance, doesn't have access, or DDD, and is needing therapy and can't afford it, that's why we have our nonprofit company. So that's always an option. I know in other fields like psychology, sometimes they have sliding scales. So, networking, looking on those Facebook groups, posting and connecting with other people is really the best way to kind of places out there that may have a sliding scale or scholarships or nonprofits so you can get therapy that way.
Awesome. I also liked that you talked about SMART goals. I think that the goal setting is so important. And we had a situation in our family where my son lost hours of speech therapy because his goals were so poorly written that it made it look like he didn't need more hours of speech therapy. Meanwhile, he's non-oral, as you say, non-verbal, and they were taking away hours of speech, and you're just like, why? Like, that is insane. But then when you sat back and looked at the goals, you realized, well, the speech therapist wasn't doing the right things when it came to the goals. So how often would you say you need to sit down and review the goals? And I'm a scientist by trade, so I love data. How often should you be looking at graphs and at progress? And what are good benchmarks? Like, how do you know that the therapist is doing what they're supposed to be doing on their end?
So, really, best practice is when you have your quarterly reviews, your quarterly progress reports with your therapist, you should be sitting down and receiving it. So, kind of the process here is, we talk with the parents as quarterly is about to come up and say, okay, has anything changed? How are the home programs going? Blah, blah, blah. And then we do our data, and then we go back with the progress report and say, okay, this is where we're at. And so it should be happening quarterly, because then families know the goals, they know the home program. That's when you can make comments about, oh, this home program goal, the way it's really not working for us anymore.
Mhm.
That's really where you can talk about the goals and when it should be happening. Um, but again, each individual is so different. I've got clients where it's like every quarter, maybe they make like a percentage or 2%. And, but in our guts, we know, wow, they're making progress in other areas, which is telling us they're making progress. And so kind of knowing that is good, and knowing progress takes time. So it's really going to be about knowing your kiddo, knowing how they learn, and knowing their pattern of progress. If your kiddo is always slow at making progress, keep that in mind when you're talking with therapists, as it goes both ways. I've had parents say, wow, my kid's not making enough progress fast enough. But then, and it is because, well, that's just who they are. But
Yeah.
then there's other ones where it's like, okay, they aren't making progress. I think they've kind of hit their plateau with this skill. And that's okay too. And a lot of that depends on age. Typically you see more progress when they're younger. And then when they get in their teens, that's where you start to see where certain things start to plateau, and then you start fine tuning, you start getting them ready for soft job skills, you start getting them ready for life skills, and that's where those goals should focus at that point. And then you'll should see different levels of progress. But yeah, definitely quarterly for sure.
Yeah. I also liked how you talked about teams working together, and making sure that because like with our child, we always made sure that Jackson's speech therapist was at his IEP meetings, or that about every 6 months, his speech therapist would be in contact with his ABA therapist. Because, like you said too, I think it's important that you realize as a parent you're with your child all the time, but there are also other providers. Like if you have speech, maybe you get an hour of speech, but can ABA, who's there for maybe 6 hours a day, implement the stuff that the speech therapist is working on? So you're getting ABA and you're getting speech, and everybody is kind of working on the same goals together. I think that that's huge, and I like that you brought that up. Is that something that therapists like you can actually bill for, though, for you to come and go to IEP meetings and go and speak with other therapists? Is that something that's really doable?
Yes and no. We have brought that up with DDD, and they say there is a code for it. But I looked in the books and I can't seem to find it now. But with that said, so if the member is present and his other providers are there and you're meeting, that is, I mean, really in my mind, that is therapy in itself, because you're learning about how they're doing in other in other disciplines now. But that's where billing gets kind of tricky, because only certain people can bill together. So that is something we're definitely trying to look at with DDD more. Now, if they're private, if this is school based, if it's a different setting, then absolutely. I mean, you should be able to bill insurance, but you should be able to bill for that time that you're there. It's just DDD. We're still kind of working on fine tuning that.
Okay.
In a perfect world, absolutely. Because how else are we supposed to collaborate?
Yeah, exactly. So the last question I really want to ask you is the shift to person-centered care and planning, because it's such an important topic that we're not just, having the same goals for every single kid. I had a speech therapist who lasted a day, because she basically told me that for every child that she taught with speech therapy, one of her goals was to force that child to make eye contact with her. And I was just like, oh my God, like, don't you know that that's like really hard for autistic kids, and they're probably not paying attention to you when you're talking to them and forcing eye contact? And, like she was just in that old frame of thinking that these are the things that you do. And like I said, I let her go in a day, because I was like, no, like that's unacceptable. That's not right. And again, parents, be okay to fire people. Like if they're not going to work out, they're going to force your kids to do things that you don't want them to do and you're uncomfortable with. It's okay to let them go. There are more out there. But when we talk about the person-centered planning, I mean, I think that there still has to be a mix, right? Like there still has to be stuff that our kids need to hit in terms of milestones that make them successful adults, but then also things that pique their interest. And can you talk a little bit about what that mix looks like? Is there a percentage of things that should be milestone based for their age, and a percentage of things that they're just really into? And can you shift them so that they're working together at the same time towards a goal, but something that they're interested in?
The new wave of therapy is really taking that person-centered approach to taking the child's interest and not forcing them necessarily to learn what we want to learn, or we want them to learn. But you can still work on developmental milestones just using their interests. So if the kiddo loves trains, you're going to work on expressive and receptive language around trains, not pulling out, oh, you have to learn all of these cards. You really use what their interests are to get that behavior that you want to achieve. Obviously if they love trains and they hate balloons, you're not going to pull out balloons to work on expressive language with that.
Yeah.
And there are those problem solving skills and cognitive skills, again, that can totally be worked on around what interests the child. You know, one thing what we're doing at BAO too is a new intervention approach that was actually developed by an OT who's on the spectrum, and it's called the neuro strengths based approach. And what it does is you look at the person's strengths and create the intervention around that. So if they're visual learners and love to, you know, look at the detail of things, well, you're going to use that strength to achieve whatever goal you're trying to achieve. So again, you can pull out beautiful, intricate pictures to work on expressive language. So you're using their strength, using their interest to achieve that milestone of expressive language. So it's absolutely doable. This person-centered approach is a newer thing. Yeah. So I don't know that it's trickled down to the curriculum in OT school and speech school, or even in the ABA world. But you would hope that therapists embrace it and see the benefit of it, because what has been going on for so many years is that people with disabilities are not looked at as people, which is so mind-blowing. But that's the reality of it.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, it still is looked at that way. And some people in high positions that we see on TV speak about people with disabilities in an inappropriate manner. And it's heartbreaking. But then you do have these amazing groups that are pushing for us to look at these people as people, which they are.
Yeah.
Look at them as having all the rights of the rest of us. They have the right to get married. They have the right to have children. They have the right to have a job. They have that right to live on their own. They do have all those rights. Now, does that mean that they should just go do it independently? No. That's what we're all here for as a team, to help support them so they can be successful in that area. And that's really person-centered, is looking at the person and who they want to be and help guiding them to that. So it's crucial that that word gets spread so that everyone continues to look at those that we work with in that manner.
Yeah, and so so person-centered planning. So I think there's a blog article on the DAMES website that I wrote about it after one of the classes that I went to. But it really is fascinating, and I think so important that this person-centered planning starts young, because I know that in the beginning of therapies, you know, kids were often not given the option to say no and not given the option to think that, you know, if a person asks you to do something, you have to comply. And that became very dangerous for these kids. And so, you know, in our house, our rule is always, if he doesn't want to do it, then you need to be creative and come up with something he wants to do, because he can say no and you're going to have to accept it, because I want him to know that he can say no to things. And it starts young, because those ideas about who you are, what you can do, and how you can express yourself start at a young age. And if you get into this, like, well, I just have to comply with everybody all the time, then that's what you carry with you to adulthood.
And I'm so glad you brought that up, because around this whole supported decision-making piece, there's an amazing advocate in Canada named Erin Sheldon, and she is a child with Angelman syndrome. And to that point, absolutely, we teach kids to be compliant, but then when they're adults, we want them to be independent. Yeah. It completely contradicts. And so how are we supposed to change all of that? And I completely agree. Unfortunately, there is curriculum out there that is new curriculum that does say, oh, don't teach them refusal, don't teach them avoidance. It's like, that is wrong.
Yeah.
You should be able to advocate. Now, that doesn't mean that just because my child refuses to put his shoes on doesn't mean he's going to not have to put his shoes on. Right. He can absolutely tell me, no, no, no. And then I may say, oh, okay, well, you can have a break for a minute, but then we're putting our shoes on because we're going to go in the car. but you want to go in. And
Yeah.
so that natural consequence of, we can't go in the car until you put your shoes on. So teaching all of that, so that self advocacy, he can say no, but he
Yeah.
also has to learn that natural consequence. You don't put your shoes on, you don't get to go in the car where you want to be. So all those pieces are so important. But I am a huge advocate for advocacy. And sometimes that's all I work on with my kids. It's so important.
That's awesome. I think that's so awesome. I think that's why you and I are just like
Yeah.
we're two peas in the pod when it comes to making sure that, you know, these children grow into as independent adults as they can be, and that you know, they're given all of those skills that they need to do that. I love that you are so focused on working with parents, and that you're just a really easy person to talk to, and you're so genuine about wanting to help all of the people that you interact with. Every time I talk to parents and I mention you, all the time it's, oh, we love Staci. Like, I have never heard a parent be like, oh, that's Staci girl. Like, you're
Well, I'm sure there's one out there. Like I said, I feel like it made people not happy.
but
I'm honest.
you're very genuine, you're very approachable, you know, and I thank you so much for coming on to Dames today to talk about how to build those good trusting relationships with therapists, because it's something that nobody really talks about, but should be talked about, and should be talked about often, because you guys are the people who are so instrumental to helping our children blossom. And it's that realization that we have to work together really to make that outcome possible. So thank you for everything that you do and for coming on
Thanks
to
for
Dames
having
today.
me. I love it. Thank you, Michelle.
All right. Well, we'll talk later.
All right. Sounds good.
Okay.
Thank
Bye.
you. Bye.